بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The chapter which we are going to look at in this week's lesson in Arabic is entitled as Babul Walima, which in English means the chapter regarding the wedding banquet and the wedding feast. Now the word walima is derived from the Arabic word walam, which means to gather and to assemble. And later on, this word walima began exclusively started being used for the wedding feast, for the dawat which is given after the husband gets married, after the man gets married to a woman. So later on in Arabic, this word walima was started being used. Now walima is considered to be a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it is considered to be an outward expression of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of getting married, and also it is a means of publicizing the nikah. It's one of the hadith or the practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "A'linu hadha nikah," which means publicize the nikah. Which means that when you get married, then tell people, tell your family, tell your friends to get that you have got married. Something like nikah in secrecy, when only a few people know. This is not the teachings of Islam. The teaching of Islam is that you should actually make people aware that you got married, so that they can pray for you, so that they can actually seek dua for the happiness in your nikah and in your marriage. But we're going to look at it later. There are some exceptions to the rule, and sometimes it is permissible to actually get married and also not telling people about it, as long as your family and your close friends know, but not everybody in the community knows. That's also allowed and permissible as well. We'll look at that later. But generally speaking, walima is a way of publicizing your nikah, because obviously the way, especially in our community, when we go to a person for a walima dawah, we say, "Oh, my walima is on Sunday." Then people say, "Oh, okay, you got married." So it's a way of like publicizing the nikah, making everyone aware that you got married. And also number two, it is the best way of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outwardly. Now I've explained this particular point before, that nikah and marriage is actually a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see many brothers, many sisters within our own community, many years have passed and they don't find a rishta. But for a boy to actually find a rishta and for that boy to then get married is actually a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I mentioned this topic before, that whenever we receive a blessing from Allah, we should do two things. We should outwardly thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and inwardly thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inwardly thanking Allah is like, for example, when Allah gives you a particular blessing, then you act according to that particular blessing. And an outward thanking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by, say, for example, after every namaz, you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this particular blessing, thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this particular blessing. So that is the outward way to show thanks to Allah, and the inward way to show thank you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be grateful to Allah, is to act upon the blessing which you have received. I'll give you an example. Ilm and knowledge, acquiring ilm and knowledge, that's a blessing from Allah. Now when somebody gets ilm, because many people don't have ilm. Many people, they're not fortunate to go to a madrasa and learn about the Quran, learn about the hadith. Only when you look at it, a selective people within one community are knowledgeable. So when you have knowledge, knowledge is a gift from Allah. So now the inward way of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of this blessing is by acting upon it. So that when you have knowledge, then you act according to the knowledge. You don't show disrespect to the knowledge by, say for example, 5 daily prayers are first. Now you don't show disrespect to the knowledge by not praying the 5 daily prayers. And the outward way of thanking Allah that Allah has given you knowledge and ilm is by, say for example, after every namaz, you raise your hand in dua and supplication. Now exactly the same when it comes to nikah and marriage. That's a blessing from Allah, a ni'mat from Allah. The inward way of thanking Allah of this ni'mat and blessing of marriage is by acting upon the rights and the hukuk which your wife has, and also in the case of a woman, the woman should also act upon the rights of her husband. That is the inward way of showing gratitude and so showing gratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the outward way of showing thank you or showing gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by performing the walima, which is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now this then takes me on to the next point, and that is with regards to the walima invitation. So if somebody invites you to a walima, what is the ruling with regards to accepting this invitation and so on? Now according to the Hanafi fiqh, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi, it is considered sunnat muakkada, an emphasized sunnah to accept the walima invitation. And as for other da'wats and other invitations, it is considered desirable and mustahab to accept it. So just say if a brother comes and says, "Oh Maulana Sahib, come to my house for dinner, come to my house for lunch." So that's because just randomly or generally a person is offering. So to accept that is desirable. So if say for example you accept it, good. If say for example without any reason you just say, "Oh well, brother, I don't want to come," without any reason, that's also okay as well. There's no sin. However, when it comes to sunnat muakkada or emphasized sunnah, if somebody invites you to a walima, then you should accept it. And the only time you can refuse is if you've got a valid reason. So to say, for example, he's inviting you to a walima on Sunday, and on Sunday you're busy. You got another walima invitation, or you've got a program on the Sunday. So you could then turn around and say to him that, "Look, brother, I'd like to come, but I'm busy, I've got this and I've got that." So in that situation, there is no sin there for you not accepting the invitation. However, if somebody is inviting you to walima, and on the Sunday you've got nothing planned, you're free, and you then say to that person, "No, I don't want to come," then that would become a sin. So remember, the ruling with regards to walima invitation is sunnat muakkada. Certain Hanafi scholars of the view that it's wajib to accept it. So now if somebody was to omit it or refuse the invitation without any reason, then it will be a sin. However, if there is some valid reasons in terms of he's got other programs on that particular day, or he's got another walima invitation, then in that situation it will be permissible for him to refuse the invitation to the walima. Now remember the information which I mentioned about accepting the walima invitation is sunnat muakkada. Remember, this only applies when you know the walima invitation which you have received is going to be according to the laws of the Sharia, within the boundaries of the Sharia. If say for example somebody is inviting you to a walima invitation and you know that there's going to be free mixing there, you know there's going to be music there, you know everything's going to be there, then in that situation it's not sunnat muakkada for you to accept. In that situation it will be unlawful and impermissible for you to, so you shouldn't accept in that situation. Sunnat muakkada is only when it's like, everything is going to be legit, everything according to the laws of the Sharia, there'll be segregation, there'll be no music and so on. This is a topic which we will look at later. There's a hadith similar to that which comes up. But obviously if somebody knows that there's going to be haram things going on, then it becomes impermissible for you to accept it. You shouldn't accept it in that particular situation. Now this takes me on to the third point with regards to the walima, and a common question or a common issue, which arises when walima is given, is something which is called sadgi and simplicity in the walima. Now, as I mentioned before, that just generally speaking in nikah or in marriage, there should be simplicity. There should be what we call sadgi. However, at the same time, no one should think that if the mezban or if the host, if they are offering, say, 2 dishes, don't think that to be against simplicity. Or just say, for example, if the mezban or the host is offering, say, 2 dishes and then with that a kind of dessert at the end, ice cream or something, don't think that to be against sadgi and against simplicity. I mentioned this particular point before, that one of my teachers, the Sheikh Maulana Yusuf Mutalib from Darul Bari, he actually touched on this particular point once, and he said that many people, they are actually stingy. And what happens is that they use sadgi, they say, or sadgi, this issue about simplicity, to hide their conjusi, to hide their bakhili, and to hide their stinginess in their heart. Meaning, they're really stingy, to tell the truth, but then they'll say, oh well, in Islam says, the walima should be very, very simple, so therefore I'm only going to invite 10 people for the walima, and I'm only going to invite 20 people for the walima. In reality, they got a lot of money. If they want, they could invite many, many hundreds of people. But then they use sadgi and simplicity, and they say, oh no, well, Islam says it should be very, very simple in the nikah, so I'm only going to invite 10 people for the walima. That is wrong. The actual ruling when it comes to the walima is that walima should be given according to a person's capability. In Arabic we call it istitar, according to his financial ability and capability. Now if someone, say for example, he could only afford to feed 10 people, then the Sharia dictates that he should only invite 10 people for the walima. If, say for example, Allah had blessed him with mal and wealth, and this person can afford to invite 300 people or 500 people, then there's nothing wrong in inviting 500 people for the walima. And this is something which is very important, because a lot of people think, oh, if we invite too many people, it's against the sunnah. No. There's a hadith which we're going to look at later of Sahih Muslim, that when Rasulullah got married to Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha, and we're going to look at this later, Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha's nikah with Rasulullah took place in the heavens. Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha was Rasulullah adopted son's wife, ex-wife it is. So adopted son, i.e. Zayd bin Haritha radhiyallahu anhu, and his wife was Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha. So what happened when Hazrat Zayd radhiyallahu anhu divorced Zainab radhiyallahu anha? So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Rasulullah to marry Zainab radhiyallahu anha. And the whole reason or the whole purpose why this order was given is to eradicate a practice of Zaman al-Jahiliyyah, of the days of ignorance, which was that a person's adopted son was considered to be one's real son. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, there's nothing like that. Like your adopted son is not your real son. Because if you imagine, or just if we assume Hazrat Zayd ibn Anhu was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's real son, then it wouldn't have been lawful for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to marry Hazrat Zayd ibn Anhu's ex-wife. Why? Because that's going to be his daughter-in-law. And a father can never ever marry his daughter-in-law. Even though his son may have divorced her, later on the father can never ever marry the daughter-in-law. We read this a couple of weeks ago in the Hurmat al-Musahar. So exactly here as well, that if he wasn't allowed, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or if the adopted son was considered to be the real son, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wouldn't have been allowed to marry Zainab radhiyallahu anha. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to eradicate this aqidah which people had of your adopted son being considered your real son. So therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to marry Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha. So it mentioned that their nikah took place in the heavens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conducted their nikah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so happy that it's mentioned the hadith of Sahih Muslim, 300 people came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's walima. And in another narration, it says that the whole city of Medina, the entire people of Medina Munawwara, came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's walima. So what we can gather from this hadith, inviting 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, is not against the sunnah. Okay, it's not. So remember, having this, many people think, oh, you've hired a hall and you've invited 100 people, that's totally against sunnah. No, that's not against the sunnah. What is against the sunnah and what is against simplicity and sadgi is, just say, for example, somebody could only afford to feed 100 people. But then what does he do? He then invites 500 people, and for the extra 400 people, he then gets loans from people, he gets loans from the bank, haram loans, interest-based loans, and then has a lavish wedding. That is against simplicity. That's what something which the Sharia doesn't advocate and Sharia doesn't preach. And I know many people, they've actually, there were many scenarios where I actually know someone who's, actually the father is not working. He's been living on benefits. So he was getting his eldest daughter married. So now they didn't have any money. So the father, he wanted a proper lavish wedding. So what he did, he kind of remortgaged his house. He got all these interest-based loans from the bank and then did a lavish wedding. Nowadays, the limousines and everything, the lighting, everything, the DJs and so on. Did a lavish wedding. Spent 50,000, 60,000 pounds. Forget about the dowry and the other issues. Just talking about the other useless things. 50,000 pounds, 60,000 pounds was used, and now he's finding it difficult to get his second daughter married and get his son's married. Why? Because he doesn't have any money. He's broke. In terms of he's now paying off the loan and the interest-based loan which he got when he got his eldest daughter married. That is against the Sharia. Okay, because that person, he didn't have the means to do that. He could only afford, say, for example, to feed, say, 100 people, 200 people. But he got a loan out, tried to make it extravagant, invited all these people, tried to, make it out. He's the richest person in the area and in the community, and now, look, he's broke and he can't actually pay off the loan. And because of that reason, he can't get his other daughters and other children married. This is against sadgi. This is against simplicity. But if you, within your means, if you can invite 100 people and you can do that, just give them normal khana food, have 2 or 3 dishes, that is not against the sunnah and against the sharia. Now we're just going to look at the ahadith. The first hadith which we're going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, narrated by Sayyidina Anas radhiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam once saw Abdul Rahman bin Auf radhiyallahu anhu asra sufrati, and he had some yellowness, i.e. effect or an asr of sufra, which is a type of fragrance, a type of khushbu, which has got a bit of yellowish kind of color on him. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him, Ma hada, O Abdul Rahman bin Auf, what is this? So Abdul Rahman bin Auf radhiyallahu anhu replied by saying, Inni tazawwajtu imra'atan ala wazni nawatin min zahabin, which means that I just got married to a woman in exchange of a piece of gold. Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then replied, Barakallahu lak, that may there be barakah and blessing in your nikah. Awlim, give the walima, perform the walima, walau bi shatin, even though it may be of a sheep. Now 2 points regarding this hadith. Firstly, Abdul Rahman bin Auf radhiyallahu anhu, as all of you know, is one of the Ashra Mubashara, one of the 10 companions who have been granted Jannah and paradise in this world. Now what happened, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw that he was wearing some kind of fragrance. Now this fragrance is actually a feminine fragrance, asra sufra. Sufra is like a fragrance which women wear. The women, they get these different kind of like scents and perfumes. So if you want to use a modern day comparison or example, just say if a man comes to a masjid and he's got some kind of women perfume on. So we were thinking, why have we got women perfume on? So exactly as well, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw Abdul Rahman bin Auf anhu, and on his kurta or his kameez, there was some yellowness there which represented fragrance or a khushbu. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is like a woman's khushbu. Where did this come from? Then Abdul Rahman bin Auf, and this is the key word, he said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I have just got married to a woman. So he was trying to imply that I got married to this woman. So mumkin hai that when we were hugging, ya is tarah, both kinar mein, that her khushbu or her fragrance came onto my clothes. So that's what he was implying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inni tazawwajtu imra'atan. Now this is the key word. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said, Barakallahu lak. May Allah give barakah and blessing to your nikah. Now from there the ulama have said, and they derive another form of simplicity and sadhi, is that it's not necessary for you to go and tell every single person that you've got married. Now look at Abdul Rahman bin Auf. Look, he's one of the Ashra Mubashshara, very close companion to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the hadith, the words of the hadith are saying that he actually got married and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't know. That's why Rasulullah asking that where did this khushbu and fragrance come from? Then he explained, I just got married. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you got married. Barakallahu lak, may Allah put barakah and blessing. So from this we can understand the simplicity of the nikah of the companions, that they would get married, but they wouldn't make it a big kind of function. Big kind of function and, letting the entire city of Medina Munawwara know that somebody's getting married. Unfortunately nowadays, that whenever there's a nikah within our community, we know that person is getting married. Even though they haven't told us, even though they haven't invited us, but we could, when they block the roads and they got the big limousines and sometimes the horse and carriage comes and then they kind of slow down the traffic and the lights outside the homes and the houses, we know that there's a nikah going on. But look at the simplicity and sadgi of the Sahabas and their nikah, that their murshid, their guide, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did not even know about his nikah. So then Rasulullah prayed for the nikah, said Barakallahu lak, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said Awlim walau bishar, which means perform walima even though it may be of a sheep. Now sheep here means walau here. The scholars have said that there's two possibilities. Either walau can come in the meaning of listaqlid, which means that even though come se come, if you were to sacrifice a sheep and was to make some curry and salad and was to give it out to people, then do that. Or walau can also come for listaqsid, in terms of even though the sheep is something which is like sacrificing a sheep and giving that as a walima, that is considered to be more than enough for a person's walima to be accepted and for a person's walima to be valid. The next hadith explains, next two ahadith explains the walima of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how or what the walima consisted of. Like the second hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, again narrated by Anas radiallahu anhu, where he says, Ma awlama Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala ahadin min nisa'ihi ma awlama ala Zainab awlama bishar. Which means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the most food which he cooked or which he made for any of the wives was for his wife Zainab radiallahu anha, and the walima which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave for her, awlama bishar, consisted of sacrificing a sheep. And then the hadith then goes on to say, again very similar hadith, again regarding the marriage of Zainab bint Jahsh, when it says Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed the walima Hina bana bi Zainab bint Jahsh, when he consummated the nikah and the marriage with Hazrat Zainab radiallahu anha, and it says فَأَشْبَعَ النَّاسِ خُبْزًا وَلَحْمًا, which means that for this particular nikah, the nikah of Hazrat Zainab radiallahu anha, the walima which Prophet gave afterwards consisted of laham, as the hadith explained before, the sheep which Prophet sacrificed, laham wa khubzan, and also roti. So roti, i.e. bread or naan, and the meat, that was the walima of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which he gave for Hazrat Zainab radiallahu anha. the next hadith is also very similar, but this time it talks about the walima and the nikah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha. Now, Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha, let me just explain a few words about Safiya radhiyallahu anha and how she came into the nikah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha was the daughter of Huway bin Akhtab. And Huway bin Akhtab, he was the leader of Banu Nadir. And what happened was that during the conquest of Khaybar, Khaybar was a battle between the Muslims, the companions, the Sahabas, and the Banu Israel and the Jews of Medina Munawwara. So when the Muslims were victorious, Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha came into the hands of the Muslims as a prisoner of war. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he did was that he freed Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha, he made her azad, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married to her. Now, what we can derive from this particular hadith and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam freeing Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha, we can derive a couple of points. Number one is that you cannot marry your own bandi yourself. Like just say, for example, somebody has a slave girl which he owns. You can't marry your own slave girl. But the way to get around it is that slave girl which you have, you free them firstly, and then afterwards you can marry them. Having a slave girl and then you marrying that slave girl itself, that is not allowed in Islam. And the reason why it's not allowed is because if you have slave girls or if you have slaves, they consider to be in your milkiyat and in your possession. And if you were to get married to your own slave girl, it's like you're taking benefit and fayda from your own self, which obviously is not allowed in Islam. So therefore the ruling is that firstly you have to free the slave girl, and then after freeing the slave girl, then you will marry that particular girl, then that is allowed. And this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did for Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha. The hadith says, أَعْتَقَ Safiya. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam firstly freed Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha, وَتَزَوَّجَهَا, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam married her, and then the hadith goes on to say, وَجَعَلَ إِتْقَهَا صَدَاقَهَا, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam designated or stipulated her freeing itqaha to be her dowry. That's obviously, as I was explaining last week's lesson about dowry. So when you get married, it is obligatory to give a dowry. But in this hadith here, he explained that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not give anything extra in terms of mal or wealth or land to Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha as her dowry, but instead Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to her or stipulated to her that me freeing you, take that as that is your dowry, that is your mahar. So the hadith says وَجَعَلَ إِفْقَهَا صَدَاقَهَا, and then the hadith goes on to say وَأَوْلَمَ عَلَيْهَا بِحَيْث, and that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave or performed the walima, and the walima consisted of a dish which in Arabic is called hayth. And hayth is a dish which consists of butter, ghee, cheese and dates. Okay, so 4 things: butter or ghee, well, we said that's like more or less one thing, cheese and dates. And it's a very common dish within the Arabs that they will get the dates, they will put some kind of, they put the ghee inside of the cheese, they'll mix it up together, and then they'll start eating. Again, from this hadith, what we can derive is that the walima which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed for Hazrat Safiya radhiyallahu anha, it wasn't like really, really lavish food, but something simple. If you want to use a modern day example, you say, you get a group of people and you give them a packet of crisps and, give them some chocolate and say, oh, this is my walima. So that's what it is. Hayth was something very, very simple, a very, very simple dish, and that was the walima of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'll just finish off with one final hadith which talks about the invitation of walima. Again, the issue has already been touched on. Hadith narrated by Ibn Umar al-Anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا دُعِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ إِلَى الْوَلِيمَةِ, which means that if somebody is invited to the walima, فَلْيَأْتِهَا, then he should come to it, i.e. he should accept the walima invitation. And then another hadith similar to that explains that فَلْيُجِبْ, he should accept it and come to the walima فَإِنْ شَاءَ, and if he wants he can eat وَإِنْ شَاءَ تَرَكَ, So again, so these ahadith all imply and indicate, as I've already explained, that Sunnat al-Muaqqada emphasize Sunnah to accept the walima invitation. And as I've already explained, that if somebody, without any reason, without any uzr or excuses, was to say, no, I don't want to come, then obviously his refusal would be considered to be sinful. But as I already explained before, remember, this is only when you know that the going on in the walima invitation is going to be lawful and halal. If you know there's going to be haram things there, or even it could be sometimes the food is haram. You know that the food they're getting from a particular place is totally haram. Then again, you are permitted not to accept the invitation. If you know there's music going on there, permitted not to accept the invitation. If you know there's free mixing and intermingling, then again, you're permitted not to accept the invitation. Well, that's the tawfiq to act on what we said. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah.